We always salute our good buddy Brian Billick, Super Bowl winning head coach. He joins us as always. Coach, lots and lots and lots to think about and talk about. Let's start your old team, the Baltimore Ravens. I tell you what, man, it doesn't matter what happens. They find a way to keep winning games, Coach. It may not be pretty. It may not be winning by double digits, but, man, they just find ways to win.
Well, when you run the ball for 215 yards against the Steelers, and the Steelers knowing that with Tyler Huntley in, they probably were not going to throw the ball as much. They only threw the ball 12 times. That was impressive. And it's like, okay, we're going to run regardless whether we're going to run. And they just kept doing it. And it was typical Steeler-Ravens game was going to come down to a single score. That seems to be the trend for forever in that series. And Tyler Huntley, I would tell you, even though he only threw it 12 times, he's capable of doing more. I like what I see in Tyler Huntley. I know he didn't win last year, but that wasn't necessarily just because of Tyler Huntley. So for however long Lamar is out going forward, I think they're in pretty good hands with Tyler Huntley, particularly if they're going to continue to run the ball the way they are.
Yeah, and it was great to get J.K. Dobbins back. I mean, look, I don't care if you're a big Bengals fan and you root against the Ravens to lose every game. Dobbins seems to be a great kid. Tore up his knee, 6 weeks out, comes back, plays really well. But, Coach, when you're sitting there and you're kind of waiting around in this day and age, I mean, it's tricky business. Mike Tomlin even acknowledged it after the game in regard to Kenny Pickett yesterday about this whole concussion thing and protocol, and they're making changes as we kind of go along during the season. If you're the head coach and you're John Harbaugh right now, you know more than likely you're not going to have Lamar Jackson this coming week. At least you don't think so. They could surprise us and he comes back. But Huntley goes out with a concussion. And then you got this Anthony Brown guy who was just activated off the practice squad, an undrafted quarterback out of Oregon. What's game planning like this week if you're the head coach of the Ravens?
Well, they're going to play I think they play the Browns this week, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep.
And the challenge, if they've got to, Greg Roman's got to look and say, well, can I duplicate what we just did? Can I throw the ball just, less than 20 times and run the ball 40 plus times, chew up the clock in the way we do? Then that's going to be the game plan. Now the problem becomes, and the Browns are capable, particularly with Deshaun Watson continuing to mature a little bit within what they're doing and open it up a little bit. If they turn it into a quasi track meet, then you got a problem, and you'll have the game plan ready for it. But I don't know that I want to be throwing the ball 35 times with Anthony Brown coming off the bench.
Injuries are becoming a major factor for many, many teams around the NFL, and you start right here in Cincinnati where they put T. Higgins on the injury report with a hamstring. Last couple of days of last week kind of showed up out of nowhere. He plays one play in the game. Tyler Boyd injures his finger the second play of the game, does not return. Trey Hendrickson breaks his wrist. He stayed in the game, but he's going to be out for quite a while. Let me start on the offensive side. The Bengals were able to get through it all. Their depth, I think, has been one of the biggest stories in the NFL this season, that no matter who goes down, they find a way to pick up the pieces and get things done. Hayden Hurst did not play this week. Where's that fine line, Brian? Let's just say, and I'm not going to ask you to diagnose Tyler Boyd, but where is that fine line as a coach where you're saying, okay, if a guy's out with a knee injury or something like that, obviously he's not going to play. Where's that fine line of saying, hey, man, we got 4 weeks to go. We got to win this division and get in the playoffs, as opposed to maybe missing a game here or there?
Particularly when you're talking about hamstrings, that is one where that's always the question I would have for the doctors when you had a player with an injury and you question him, is he going to play this week or not? The question becomes, one, can he injure it substantially more by playing than if he doesn't play? What's the difference in the prognosis for the injury if we lay him out a week or 2 weeks compared to playing him? And if the doctors say, well, he can be significantly better in 2 weeks, well, then you got to think about laying him out. If they're saying, well, it's a hit and miss, and it's iffy. It's 50-50. Well, then you're thinking, okay, if I'm going to flip a coin, then let's go ahead and play him. So that's always the question that you have. And you're right about the injuries. Everybody has them going down the stretch in this dash for the cash, we used to call it in December, and getting to the playoffs. Injuries are going to be a factor for everybody in the league. It was how great was it to get Joe Mixon back, and him come back, and now you got the combination of Mixon and Pirine. That's pretty good. And as long as you have Jamar Chase, if you can get Hurst back a little bit, they're going to be okay. And in that last game against the Ravens now I know they've got to play the Bills as well, and that's going to be the biggest challenge. The Ravens have a pretty pliable schedule there. They do have to play Pittsburgh again, but it's in Baltimore. But that last game with the Ravens versus Cincinnati, that's going to be a whole lot on the line for that game.
No doubt about it. Could be for the number 1 seed if the Bengals were to beat Buffalo that week before the Ravens come into town, and both teams, quote unquote, win out up until that game. That's all the marbles. That's not only the division, could be the number 1 seed. For the Bengals, it would be the number 1 seed because they will have beaten, if that's the case, both Buffalo and Kansas City. Tom Brady, and we've talked a little bit about him. I don't know how much, Brian, you watched that game yesterday. They've had all kinds of injuries, devastating injuries along that offensive line. This guy's just getting pounded back there. And, the Bengals play him this week, and you never count out Tom Brady. But Brian, it's just hard to watch.
Well, we always and you're right. It has less to do with Tom Brady. Everybody for years now have been saying, okay, when's it going to end for Tom Brady? And no one wants to. I'm not going to be the one to say no, he's done. But we also knew that when the decline started, it would be precipitous. That it would be quick. Even though he's in great shape and the things that he does. But this is what's going on around Tom Brady, like you said, with the offensive line. And certainly at this point in his career, he's not going to be able to do some of the things that maybe he did when he was younger to escape and avoid that. So it's not good. They're just not a very good football team right now. Now, you can't underestimate them. And obviously it is still Tom Brady. But you have to give San Francisco credit too now. They've that defense, their ability to run the ball, they ran for the ball for over 200 times. They kept just what we talked about with Brock Purdy, the wonderkid now, that Mr. Irrelevant coming in. He only had to throw it 21 times. They ran it 36 times. So that formula that San Francisco loves to have, everybody does if you can do it. But run the ball, keep the pitch count down, play really good defense, get the turnovers like they did against Tom Brady, which is rare. That's a pretty good formula for them. So a lot of it had to do with the fact that San Francisco is pretty darn good.
Brian, last thing I want to ask you about is, one of the great stories right now in the NFL is Detroit. This team just looked terrible per usual. You hate to say it. Early in the year, and now all of a sudden, they've won, 6 of their last 7, I think it is, 5 of their last 6, something like that. They're a game and a half out of the playoffs. This team is playing like a team that looks like a playoff team. I mean, they just hammered Minnesota yesterday. That wasn't even a game.
You got to give Dan Campbell and Detroit credit, because you're right. They are kind of like the black hole. Things just go in there and you never see them again. I did a show a week in Minnesota, and it was stunning that Detroit was favored in that game. It was only 2, but they were favored because of there's something about the history and at that stage and when the records, they went through the whole thing with me, and I thought, boy, Detroit favored over Minnesota, the way Minnesota's playing, are you kidding me? At 10-2? But you're right, and it obviously held up. And you're right, it's good to see, too. Detroit, you'd love to, regardless of who your allegiances are with, you'd love to see Detroit finally kind of scratch out and be fairly relevant. They're just on the cusp of it. And Minnesota's okay, but we also saw, other than Philadelphia, who continues to roll, Dallas was in a close game with Houston. That could have either gone the other way too, which was a real shocker. So outside of Philadelphia, the top teams in the NFC, Minnesota and Dallas, along with them, show some signs of, maybe on any given day they are vulnerable.
Yeah, and the last team, Brian, I want to ask you about, speaking of looking vulnerable because they look good for so long, is Miami. Now all of a sudden, they've played a couple of teams, one very much in playoff contention. They get hammered by the 49ers 2 weeks ago. They go out to play the Chargers, who have injuries all over the place. I mean, that might be the single most injured team in the NFL this year, especially on defense. Miami looks terrible, just terrible.
Well, and part of it, and not to make excuses for it, because we talk all the time about West Coast going to East Coast and East Coast going to West Coast. Miami, you're right. They're in a run here now that they're 3 games on the road. They were at San Francisco. They stayed out there, which is always hard to do, even though if the weather's nice or whatever. So they go down and play the Chargers. Now they come home. They got to go up to Buffalo. So they've had 3 road games, 2 West Coast runs. Now come home. They got to go up to Buffalo. And we see that Miami's a good, solid team. The record and who they were against is certainly a factor. And now that they've got into a litany of some pretty good teams, we're finding out what they really are. They're certainly capable. They're a playoff capable team, but I don't know. I don't know that I'd put them at any point in the upper echelon of the AFC. And we're certainly going to find out their ability. This would be a real statement game for them. Tua was 10 of 28. Everybody's still talking about, is this a guy or not? I don't know that we. And certainly to go on the road to Buffalo against Josh Allen and get a win would certainly help, quail a little bit of those discussions about, is this a guy or not?
Yeah. All right, Brian, I know they're getting all fired up there in Columbus, Ohio. A couple of weeks away from the big one, taking on number 1 Georgia. I want you to start gathering all your information, looking at all the film, and in about the next week or so, we're going to have you give us your picks of that college Final Four.
Yeah, see, they're already calling me wanting those picks, too. It's a piece of cake. They got Georgia easily. I can't imagine Ohio State not being favored by 2-3 touchdowns in that game.
Hey, did you watch, by the way, before I let you go, because I talked about it a little bit at the beginning of the show. Did you see or hear any of the Caleb Williams Heisman Trophy speech? I did not. I got to tell you, I would encourage you, and I said it to our audience a little bit earlier. That kid's story is just unbelievable, starting with his father. And, man, if there is any illustration about the importance of a father in a son's life, and moms with daughters and moms and sons and dads and daughters, but having this kid's dad around, and starting when he was in 8th grade, he told his dad, he says, "Dad, I love football." And this was after being told by the coach in football that he was too small and he wasn't going to be a quarterback. And he's in the car with his dad, and he says, "Dad, I love the smell of football. I love the language of football. I love everything about football." And his dad looks at him and says, "Okay, it's one thing to talk about it. Let's see if you're ready for a plan." They come up with this plan, and for the next 5 years, this kid gets up with his dad at 5 o'clock in the morning, works out before school, goes to school, comes home after school, works out at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and on Saturday, he's a Heisman Trophy winner.
Yeah, great stories. And it, again, underlines the role that athletics can have, even if it had not turned out for him and he had not become a good football player. Boy, the lessons learned. I just was at my grandson's basketball game last night. And they come down. They're down by 3. Kid kicks out. He's at the 3-point line, sinks it to put into overtime. They go into overtime, comes back, gets the last shot, sinks it for 2, and they win the game. You don't get lessons like that anyplace else. And for these young people and for this kid as well, I hope it's a reminder for all of us just how important that athletics can be. I know it can get overblown and people can become negative with it, but how important athletics can be in these young people's lives, and it's so great that it's still available to them.
No doubt about it. All right, Brian, thanks for your time, my friend. Keep coaching them up down there.
All right, we'll do it.
All right, buddy. Brian Billick, kind enough to join us and break it all down.